On voit que il fait un peu plus beau.
It's a little bit nicer outside than yesterday. Something to be thankful for. So we'll start with the minutes of the previous meeting. Are they adopted? Yes or no? Yes? That doesn't seem very controversial. Point 2, business arising from previous meetings. Is there anything that needs to be raised from the previous meeting? No? Perfect. 3, interpretation services. With us this morning, we have the Honourable Joel Lightbound, Minister of Government Transformation, Public Works and Procurement, and Quebec Lieutenant. Alex Binet, Government Transformation, Deputy Minister, and Jean-François Limburner from the Translation Bureau. Minister, do you have some opening remarks to get us started today? Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for having me here today. I understand it's fairly unusual to have a minister appear before the Board of Internal Economy, so I'm honored to be here. It's a great pleasure. Thank you. I'll be talking today about an absolutely fundamental service to the functioning of our parliamentary activity. And before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the interpreters that are here today supporting the committee's work. Thank you very much. With their expertise, they allow legislators to do their work in both official languages, and they also make our work accessible to all Canadians. Their role is essential to our democracy and public trust in our institutions. Interpretation is not just any old service, it is an essential democratic structure. Every year, thousands of hours of interpretation are necessary to support the work of the House of Commons, standing and special committees, the work of the Senate, caucuses, and other parliamentary activities. Since 2020, there's been an increase in the need for interpreters, notably due to the increased number of hybrid meetings, more committee meetings, and other digital platforms. This has also led to an increase in costs of about 70% for interpretation services. At the same time, the interpretation sector in Canada is under sector. There's a limited number of interpreters, even though demand is growing in public and private institutions. So we find ourselves in a context where we are in competition for expertise. Our responsibility here is twofold: to protect the quality and health of interpreters, ensuring service to Parliament without any interruption. And that's why over the past few years, the Translation Bureau has taken structural decisions. First, to have stricter protocols to protect interpreters' health during hybrid meetings, notably in terms of having minimum audio standards. This was done in order to reduce the injuries due to acoustic shock that have happened in Canada and internationally. The number of incidents has gone down by 75% in recent years. And I would remind all parliamentarians here to always follow the directives about earpiece use. We also modernized our supply system. A new request for standing offers was instituted last year. It ends the rigid contracting structure that previously existed and allows us to regularly integrate new freelancers and to increase the pool, as well as to increase our operational flexibility at peak times. Thanks to this new approach, the Translation Bureau today has a pool of 41 accredited freelance interpreters, as well as the other contracting measures that are already in place. This allows us to meet the needs of Parliament. Those numbers may seem small, but in a very niche sector where training a conference interpreter takes many years and success rates on exams are fairly low, any gain is of strategic importance. It's also important to ensure that we have training, mentoring, and long-term planning to ensure that there are more interpreters for the future. It's important to ensure the stability of these services down the road. I would like to reiterate that Parliament is always the Translation Bureau's top priority. When decisions need to be made, need to be made. Resources always go to Parliament first. These decisions are made with the House administration, and we attempt to anticipate periods of peak demand. When it comes to accreditation, allow me to be clear. The standards have not been lowered. The requirements are still high. Adding an external review increases the transparency and credibility of the process. The final decision still rests with the Translation Bureau. The objective is not to facilitate success, but rather to ensure that the process remains robust and that the professional ecosystem is preserved. We face an important decision. Either we adapt our services for a market that existed 20 years ago, or we modernize in order to protect the quality and standards that parliamentarians depend on, and Canadian democracy as well. We've chosen the responsible path by modernizing our contracting processes while still protecting the health and safety of Canadians, investing in future interpreters, and increasing linguistic capacity. Our commitment is clear. We want to ensure stable, professional standards for a modern bilingual parliament. Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister. Questions? Mr. Perron. First of all, thank you very much, Minister, for being with us this morning. I think it sends a better message than simply the letter that we received, with respect. In your remarks, you talked about transparency. You know, for quite a while here, I've been following this issue, Mr. Lightbound. You'll recall that we spoke about it last summer or fall, I believe. And I was surprised. You know, you talked about transparency, but I think you need to walk the talk. When we had officials from the Translation Bureau appear previously, I learned a few weeks after their appearance that the accreditation exam had been changed. Now, I'm not saying the accreditation exam is not good. I'm not skilled enough to be able to say that. But it seems to me that we should have been informed of that during the appearance. We didn't ask questions about it because we didn't know the exam was going to be changed. So unless I missed something in your remarks, maybe Mr. Lindberner can intervene here. It seems that we should have been aware. So I think we need to work together on this. So I really want to have a respectful and constructive role here. We spoke informally earlier, but you know, I do want to say this officially. When you say that Parliament remains the top priority, can you guarantee that there has been no reduction in quality of service to Parliament? And I hope we can have a short answer. First of all, Mr. Perron, thank you very much for your interest in this file and your leadership on the file. I know it's an issue you care about a lot. We have spoken about it in the past. And I think that it's wonderful that you take this interest in the quality of interpretation services to Parliament and services in both official languages. So I want to recognize that. For your first question, there has not been a change to the accreditation exam. The change that was made, well, as you know, there are 4 interpreters from the Translation Bureau who grade exams. We added 2 external perspectives. So Matthew Ball and Louis Jolicoeur, who are experts in the field, and they bring their perspective to the exam. But the exam itself, the accreditation process, has not changed. Just want to reassure you. Well, you know, I'd like to believe that. But, you know, you've talked about these 2 independent experts. We could certainly discuss that, but it seems to me that an administrator from the Translation Bureau is not an independent person. It's someone who's part of the bureaucracy. But, you know, that's kind of the weeds. To get to the heart of the matter, I wasn't going to name them, but you did. Mr. Jolicoeur apparently has a good reputation, and Mr. Ball. So the 2 of them are actually are not accredited interpreters based on the information that I have. Again, your colleagues may want to answer, but if I say anything that's not incorrect, I'm certainly counting on you to intervene and correct me. That's what you're here for. But based on the information I have, they're not accredited. So they're evaluating people in the context of this exam, even though they themselves are not qualified. So could you imagine, an accreditation exam for engineers and the exam being administered by someone who's not an engineer or a nurse, for example? It seems to me that this is quite inconsistent. So given that we are in a period of great change, a lot of things have changed, the criteria have changed, and a lot of people are very concerned about this. I want to be able to trust you. I want to be able to trust the Translation Bureau. Again, I think there's a lot of good faith here. But you've said that you've brought in 2 independent experts. One doesn't seem independent to me, and the other one doesn't seem qualified to do the work. So it seems to me that this is a problem. If I can answer Mr. Perron respectfully, so you're right about Mr. Jolicoeur. Now, Mr. Ball is an accredited interpreter and actually was the chief interpreter of Canada. So, he has a long history of service. He also interpreted events like the G7 in Charlevoix, the federal leaders debate, and even the visit of the Pope to Canada in 2022. So he certainly has done he has a lot of experience in the Translation Bureau. Now, Mr. Jolicoeur is a professor emeritus who was at the Sorbonne University. He has a fairly impressive CV as well. So just to reassure you, based on the results of the exam under the new system, there hasn't been a difference between the evaluation done by the 4 interpreters overseeing the exam and the 2 external adjudicators. So this is simply a new perspective that's been added. First of all, I'm glad to learn that Mr. Ball is accredited. Now, you talk about an external perspective, but they hold 50% of the votes. That's a big change in the weighting of the exam. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. So the 4 interpreters who have always administered the exam have 50%, and Mr. Jolicoeur has the other 50%. And then Mr. Ball is the one who would make the decision if there was an incompatibility. Is that correct? I'll let Mr. Lindberner answer. Yes, that's a very good question, Mr. Chair. As was said, there are 4 interpreters from the Translation Bureau who do the evaluation. It's the same exam as before. It hasn't changed. Mr. Ball looks at those same recordings independently, and Mr. Jolicoeur as well. So essentially it's 4 TR4s plus Mr. Ball, that makes 5, and Mr. Jolicoeur 6. But it is the Translation Bureau that will make the final decision based on those results. They make the decision about who gets accredited. So, Mr. Lindberner, you're telling me that Mr. Jolicoeur doesn't have 50%. Exactly. That's what I said last time. And, he doesn't have a bias because he's not from the Translation Bureau. The goal here is really just to increase transparency. Now, I'm going to deal with a number of different subjects here, so I'll move on, but I'll say that that's not the information that I have. When it comes to Mr. Ball, again, I don't want to accuse anyone. I'm just asking questions. I was told that he was also a member of the Canadian Consultancy for Languages. Which also gets some of the contracts. First of all, is that true? And second of all, does that not create a conflict of interest? I mean, it does raise issues. When someone working at the Translation Bureau is a member of the association that is being awarded most of the contracts, is there not a bit of an issue there? I certainly can't hire members of my family. Mr. Chair, you're referring to the Association of Interpreters. There are a number of groups that offer services to Parliament. You're referring to engineers earlier. There are professional orders in every province that have their own accreditations. So the IEC organization is a conference interpreters organization, so it's entirely normal that Mr. Ball would be a member of that association, just like an engineer would be a member of an engineering association. So you don't believe there's a conflict of interest there? No. I just want to make sure. No, absolutely not. So the process here, the goal is really to reassure people. I'm going to move to a different subject now. I still have some doubts about why the accreditation exam was changed and why the average pass rate went from 11% up to 17%. That is an increase, even though you've said that you weren't trying to facilitate passes. I'd like to move on to the question of requests for standing offers. There's a very clear policy here of going toward the lowest bidder. Now, Minister, that's never a good thing in a department if we're talking about lowest bidders. We've seen this happen at different levels of government, Quebec and federally. When you go for the lowest bidder, it's not always the best service. And it's not just that. We've also reduced the recognition of preparation hours required. There's also been an increase in exposure to hybrid settings. So a number of factors here are quite concerning. It's concerning for the interpreters themselves and also for the people who depend on their services, including myself and many ordinary Canadians, because it reduces the number of freelance interpreters available. In your presentation, you said that there were 41 accredited freelancers. I'm glad to see that number's gone up a little bit from 37. But, you know, there were 84 before. So there are a number of people who have simply not bid. And whenever I say this, people write to me and tell me about their experiences. You know, I have emails. I've seen some of the offers that were made and the considerations that were made, you know, under what circumstances would a bid be turned down. And it seems very concerning to me. When there's a shortage of workers in a profession, it's important not to reduce working conditions, because that's not how you attract new people. So when you say that there's more training, well, you know, it's great to have new programs at Laval University, for example, but that's a micro program. And generally, you need a master's degree to interpret a parliament. So why choose the lowest bidder? And why have that as your top criteria? And don't tell me it's not the top criteria, because I have a number of emails saying that it is. That's my concern. And Minister, this is what I was talking about in the first letter that I sent you. I said that we should sit down with people to understand this issue. I still think it's a good idea. I'm not saying we should panic, but, and I don't want to take too much time here, I'll leave you time to answer, but do you really think it's a good idea to be giving contracts to the lowest bidder? I'll come back to the issue of the lowest bidder because it is an important concept, particularly as Minister of Procurement. But just when it comes to the pass rate for the exam, since October 2021, there were 7 accreditation exams. The average pass rate was 11%, but I'll give you some examples. In November 2022, so before the changes in question, the rate was 24% pass rate. Later, 17%, then 16%. And again, between the 4 interpreters and Mr. Ball and Mr. Jolicoeur, there wasn't any difference in terms of the assessment that they made. So we ended up within that average. So there are fluctuations. When it comes to the lowest bidder, I heard you say that it's never a good thing. I don't necessarily agree that it's never a good thing. I think in procurement, it is important to have competition. We want to ensure that there's competition so that we can get the best value for taxpayers. Now, just because we've chosen the lowest bidder, that doesn't mean that you're going to have lower quality. The accreditation is the same. The standards are the same. The accreditation process in the Translation Bureau, as we've seen from the results of the exam, it's not easy. You always want to make sure that you have the highest quality for Parliament. And when it comes to the costs, of course, lowest bidder has to do with cost. In 2019, 6 hours of interpretation cost $800, and now the median today is about $1,400 for 4 hours. So that represents an increase of 70% over 5 years. And I think it's valid to ensure that costs go up in a more responsible fashion in the future, and that we have the procurement processes that make that happen. The new request for standing offers is a way for us to maintain quality and get the best value as well. And also operationally, it gives us more flexibility to ensure that we can meet the needs of Parliament. I understand that, Mr. Lightbound, but 70% cost increase. There's a reason for that. If you go shopping today compared to 5 years ago, we may be talking about a 70% increase or close to that. If you look at rents in Ottawa, they may have increased close to 70% as well since the pandemic. And things changed in the pandemic. If you talk about the hybrid parliament, my political party always tries to work constructively with the government and has tried to work on this issue with the government, because in an enormous amount of resources were invested in hybrid parliament and are being invested there, and that's money that could be put elsewhere, so financial resources that could be invested in other government operations. If we could start limiting hybrid parliament, it would save a lot of money. I'm not saying we need to get rid of it. You can maintain it for votes, for exceptional circumstances linked to family or health reasons, but having hybrid parliament for everyone all the time when almost no one uses it is perhaps not a good idea. I mean, have you seen anyone intervene in the House online in the past few months? It's extremely rare. So I think that there is a waste of money here, and the hybrid situation increases health risks to the interpreters. It lowers their working conditions. And that's one of the changes that has really concerned me. Interpreters are still highly exposed to hybrid sound. Yes, cost inflation is real, but there are also other places that we can be saving money. And I think that the Official Languages Act is very clear. It requires that both languages, English and French, must be equivalent in status. And I'll go back to what I was saying earlier. You said that you guaranteed that there would be no restrictions, but my job is not to work only for myself. My job is to work on behalf of the constituents that I represent and the people of Quebec and Canada. I think people have the right to high-quality interpretation services. I cited an example at our last meeting from the Nuclear Safety Commission, where the interpretation was of absolutely atrocious quality. Now, I don't know if you know all of the details, but I have them, so I'll share them with you. Once again, please correct me if what I'm saying is not accurate. But on February 12th, I certainly let loose a little bit about what was happening, and I talked about the fact that there were 5, 6, 7, 8 sentences in English, and the person in French couldn't put many words together. I, as a francophone, I couldn't understand. Now, at 10 p.m. that night, the Translation Bureau sent out an email trying to recruit people to do the next Nuclear Safety Commission meeting on February 13th. Now, I want to thank the Translation Bureau for making that change, but you'll understand, Minister, that when you hire someone at 10 p.m. the night before or the next morning, the same morning of the conference, to interpret something as complex and difficult as the Nuclear Safety Commission, the people sent there would not have been sufficiently prepared. Normally, a meeting like that would involve a full day of documentation beforehand. So this is what's being cut, and I don't think this is a good idea. It's not a good idea to cut interpreters' preparation time. And what happened on February 13th is that there were a number of interruptions. Only one interpreter, accredited interpreter, I don't know if it was a man or a woman, but there was one person who went to interpret and work with 2 other unaccredited interpreters. It was very difficult. But certainly, the service there was better than the previous one that I had brought up in this meeting. Now, I have a series of questions here. First, do you think it's normal that parliamentarians should receive better service when it comes to interpretation than departmental meetings? Because I think people working in the departments and people listening to those meetings have the same right to high quality interpretation services. Now, the other question, I don't think it's normal that I would have to intervene in this way in order to have the Translation Bureau make that change for the Nuclear Safety Commission. And this has happened elsewhere as well, Minister. It's still happening. I can give you examples. In your own department, contracts are being subcontracted to non-accredited examples. Health in Canada Science Forum, the Nuclear Safety Commission, as I said, the IRCC, a whole series of agencies that are receiving unaccredited interpreters. Now, obviously, I haven't listened to all of these meetings, but it seems to me that they're similar in quality to the example that I mentioned on February 12th. So would you be ready to sit down? Because, I think that the overall solution here is that we assess the service overall and, try to figure out what is the level of service that these people can provide. And, there are people who are accredited who are not bidding. Maybe I sound like a unionist here, but, I'm just a Francophone member of Parliament who cares about the French language. So I'd like to hear your answer. Sorry, it's hard for me not to go on and on. That is the case for members of Parliament. Listen, you're raising good points, and I think that there are things that we can work on together. Because, okay, you said a number of things. First of all, you asked whether I think that parliamentarians should take precedence over other types of people or meetings. The Translation Bureau's mission is to ensure service in both official languages, high-quality service to parliamentarians and the Canadian Parliament. To me, that's clear. That is our top priority. That won't change. Now, different departments do not have to, they're not obligated to work with the Translation Bureau when it comes to interpretation services. So they may have contracts with external providers. Now, the Translation Bureau could play a bigger role in ensuring that different departments adopt best practices, for example, to find high-quality interpreters. There are about 200 conference interpreters in Canada, so it is a limited pool given the demand, but I would agree that the Translation Bureau certainly could play a greater role in helping different departments meet their needs while respecting the highest quality standards. Now, in the example that you mentioned, I don't believe it was an interpreter from the Translation Bureau, but maybe Mr. Limburner would have something to add, so I'll give the floor to him. Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Chair. Indeed, our external partners, well, like our priority is really to support Parliament. So as soon as we were alerted, we made sure that we sent backup. Of course, every event has a different context, depending on the participants and how things work. In this case, the client was happy that we were able to help out. There are around $20 million that are spent out for services outside of Parliament for interpretation. Now, they're not all equal. Sometimes there's a foreign language, so there may only be one person available for a particular Indigenous language. Sometimes you may have interpreters for official languages. There are also departments that may take services that provide subtitling, for example. So that's outside of our services. But we could help share best practices. In my opinion, the best quality is in Parliament. Of course, we can't replicate that everywhere, but we do have best practices, and we can try to help the departments with that. Thank you very much to both of you for those answers. Mr. Limburner, it seems to me that there's acceptable quality and unacceptable quality. The extract that I was mentioning was not acceptable. I have examples here of the School of Public Service where you yourself were interpreted. You were speaking, and there were interpreters interpreting your work. And the quality needs to be there. So I can't believe that. And I want to recognize the people in the booth and thank all of the people who wrote to me and gave me information about this, because it's very important to have all of the information to deal with this file properly. But, if there's a difference, we still need the two languages to be equivalent in quality. And when you say that departments don't need to take interpreters from the Translation Bureau, I understand. I understand your priority is Parliament, but still we need to respect the Official Languages Act. And if you look at the extracts that I provided, this is not respecting the Official Languages Act. The two languages are not of equal status here. And with the new working conditions, the new standing offer, we could talk about that forever and make all sorts of evaluations. But what I've understood about the working conditions of interpreters is that, I think we didn't do a very good job recruiting the people who are really qualified. So, you talked about the 41 people, but what about the other 43 people who are accredited, who used to bid? Why don't we try and find them? If you have to be calling people at 10 p.m. at night before a meeting, people are called at the very last minute in a sort of random fashion. These are people who work for us. It's really important that we have good people who are well treated. We need people to stay. In my writing office, I try to play my staff as well as I can, because I ask a lot of them and I want them to stay. That's how you make people stay. I talked about hybrid parliament earlier. I think that was important to raise. I also think that the Nuclear Safety Commission and things like that is not good for the reputation of the Translation Bureau or the reputation of Parliament. It's not good for anyone. It shouldn't be happening. I'm very happy to hear you say, Mr. Lightbound, that you'd be open to working with me on this. Now, I know you made your formal statements this morning, but I think that or Mr. Limburner, you didn't make a formal statement this morning, but I think that we could talk about that in more detail. But really, there are things that need to be done. So there are things that need to change in terms of streamlining the operations, but I don't think that the Translation Bureau absolutely needs to be profitable. When you say it's too expensive, we need to cut, well, it's an essential service. Would you say that to, ambulance drivers? There are things that it's not a good idea to cut. You need to ensure that the essential services are there. So we're talking about investing 5% of our total budget to defense. I think that we can also spend some money on protecting our official languages. And we need to treat our human resources properly. So that's what I want to say. And when you try to cut and always take the lowest bidder, I know you don't agree with what I'm saying. You're saying there are other criteria. But sometimes if someone costs 10% more, but they're very qualified and maybe they have a legal background to interpret a legal meeting, well, maybe they're worth 10% more, because the people listening to the interpretation will be listening to someone who really understands the terminology and understands the way of thinking of the participants in the meeting. People who interpret at the Supreme Court, now correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Limburner, but I'm convinced that they don't just send anybody there. It's highly technical. So it's important that we not only take the lowest bidder. That's not the only way of reducing costs. Right now, freelancers are being put into competition in a really harmful way. People are trying to charge less, but they're also cutting their preparation time. That means the service will go down. So perhaps I'll get your reaction to that, Minister. So I would just say, when it comes to the number of interpreters, there are two types of interpreters providing service to Parliament. So there are freelancers and that's mainly what we're talking about now. And then there are the staff interpreters employed by the Translation Bureau. In 2025, we increased the number of staff interpreters by 5 people, which is good news. And when it comes to the cost and the standing offers, if you look at the average amount paid, it's around the same amount as what was paid under the old system, but it allows for more flexibility, operational flexibility, to make sure that we can meet Parliament's needs. I just wanted to say that. For everything else, I think that you've raised really important points, and we share a concern for those issues. My mission as minister, of course with the help of Mr. Limburner and Mr. Benet, is to ensure that parliamentarians and Canadians have access to interpretation services of the highest quality. And I think that accreditation does need to be very rigorous. If you look at the training for the interpreters, that really ensures that there is that high quality. And whenever there is an incident, there's always a formal complaint, and measures are taken to ensure that things are changed. Because, interpretation is complex. It happens live. There are parliamentarians like me in question period who talk extremely fast. I wouldn't want to have to be an interpreter interpreting me. It's a very difficult thing to do. And, I said this at the beginning of the meeting, but I do want to acknowledge the work of all of the interpreters, be they staff interpreters or freelancers. So if I understand correctly, Minister, based on these examples quoted by Mr. Perron, when you run into situations like this, you intervene to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Is that correct? The example from the Nuclear Safety Commission? Or yes, and there may be other examples as well. So you take steps to correct that? All the complaints are studied by the Translation Bureau and appropriate measures are taken, yes. So if we were to find other examples like this, we could contact you, contact your department, and there would be a follow-up. Is that correct? 100%.
Je peux pas écouter des vidéos à temps plein pour trouver les défauts et amener ça au prix là, en même temps. J'apprécie M. Limburner qui a eu l'ajustement, mais je peux pas faire ça à temps plein. Là. Fait que, c'est de la responsabilité aussi des ministères de s'assurer que ça a de l'allure. Puis il faut qu'il y ait quelqu'un qui le regarde, il faut qu'il y ait quelqu'un qui le lise. Là, je suis sur français, puis j'ai le son en anglais, je vais l'enlever. Est-ce que...
You talked about technical issues and about official complaints. It's not always a question of complaints. I have a table, and I can send it to you, Mr. Lightbound, and it's a pretty big table, and I ask all of my MPs in committees to really listen very carefully to interpretation and to intervene. Sometimes their sound is being cut. Sometimes there's issues with interpretation. I have a lot of incidents. I'm not saying that they're going to disappear overnight, but it's already something that is so difficult. Most MPs cannot speak both languages. The majority of MPs cannot speak both languages. And the interpreters, they can listen to us, they interpret what we're saying, they interpret into the other language, and they keep the same intensity. It's not translation, it is really interpretation. It takes a lot of concentration, it's very hard. And this is why I take it to heart. And when I see the quality going down in departments, well, even when they tell me, well, don't worry about it, the Parliament is our priority, well, if we keep it going like this, in 5 years, it's going to happen to us as well. So it's important to put the right resources towards this issue. I think you've decided to take my offer. And again, it's not about being profitable. The hybrid setting is something we have to look at as well, and we have to look at people who are able to do this work. And it's true, you made a distinction between staffers and freelancers, but I talk about both. both categories. I don't make a distinction between staffers and freelancers, but there are freelancers who are not bidding to this standing offer because they think their working conditions have diminished. Maybe we can talk to them. I'm worried. And I'm really not happy when my MPs tell me, for example, we had a caucus, the Maritime Caucus, and they asked for interpretation, and they couldn't get it because there aren't enough resources, because the priority is the Parliament and committee, so my MPs didn't go because they couldn't understand what was being said. We don't do an official complaint every time, this is what I'm saying, but it's happening daily. I don't know if you listened to me the other day, but your colleagues, Mr. Minister, that are in committees, and they see me lose some of my question time because we have problems with RSI, because the interpretation is remote or because participants are remote. It's not all chairs of committees that are really nice, like Mr. Kalapeja here. Some other chairs are more strict, and I'm losing time, 25 seconds, 30 seconds from my question time. So the Francophone, who is bilingual, they know how important the questions are. So then they'll just switch to English because they don't want to lose some of their time. So again, you have to be very, very vigilant about all of this. Thank you, Mr. Perron. I don't think any MP should feel like they couldn't use their official language of choice. This is really the foundation of our parliament, and I agree with you. I want to go back to the point of safety. Yes, it's true. There are less incidents. The number of incidents lowered by 70%, but like you know, some incidents do happen. And again, this is teamwork. Of course, I think that the technical team at the House of Commons really worked hard to improve conditions, and I think it helped reduce the number of incidents. And again, we make reminders daily. And at the end of the pandemic, when we came back on site, we talked a lot about the proper use of microphone and headsets. And again, I think it's important to make these reminders so that we ensure the safety of interpreters. And that's, I think, what I had to say today. You see where I put my little headset? And there you go, you're a good student. But it's also important to wear it. Because what happens, sometimes we speak in French, and some of our colleagues are in the same room as us, and sometimes they're doing something else, and they don't speak French, and they do not wear the headset, so they do not listen to the interpretation. And I don't think that the interpreters can resolve that issue because the people are not listening to interpretation. It happened to me that after a speech in the House of Commons, one MP said, who was not listening to my question at all, tried to answer it. So it's quite weird. So there are some things we can't control, but some we can if we collaborate together. I think we really have to look at what's happening right now, and we have to be vigilant because things are going downhill. I don't see other questions. There are other questions. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for appearing today before us, and thank you for giving us excellent answers in good faith, very detailed. I know that the French language is something you really care about. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to add something. Mr. Perron, you said something interesting. Sometimes we do not have time to make an official complaint. So maybe we could have a feedback system, a little more formal, but not necessarily have an official complaint, but this would allow us to get more feedback from what's happening on the field. I think that's what you're asking for, Mr. Perron, that there is that we are more vigilant so that we can protect the French language. So that's key. Alors, thank you everyone for being here today. And now we're going to the item number 4, LTVP Working Group update. And I would invite our guests, Mr. Kmitsch, and Monsieur Dicker, Chief Information Officer, Public Service and Procurement Canada, and Madame Jennifer Garrett, Assistant Deputy Minister.
Speaker, I have a series of speaking notes I need to use, so I'll just read them through, although they're all your packages. As chair of the LTVP Working Group, I'm here to provide an update to the board on the progress of the Center Block Rehabilitation Program and other long-term vision and plan projects. The working group is seeking the board's endorsement on several items to maintain project momentum as work advances towards the construction phase of the Center Block Rehabilitation Program, the final schematic design of the Block 2, and advancement of related major capital projects. Accordingly, the working group recommends that the board endorse the final design for the center block and the Parliament Welcome Centre, endorse the integrated design approach for the center block heritage rooms, endorse the proposal to refocus the material handling and pedestrian underground tunnels in the reconfigured space, endorse the Block 2 House of Commons functional program, exterior design concept and conceptual floor plan layouts, endorse the return of the Queen Elizabeth II Monument to Parliament Hill, and endorse participation in governance bodies for the Indian Residential Schools National Monument. Pour la conception définitive de l'édifice du centre et du centre d'accueil.
For the design of Center Block and the Welcome Center, this is an important stage for Center Block and the Parliamentary Welcome Center. This marks the passage from the design phase to the construction phase. Thanks to close collaboration with parliamentarians, the design reflects a collaboration between Parliament and PSBC. It supports the work of Parliament and provides significant access to the public. So here are the key aspects. Restoring and preserving heritage elements, notably ceremonial spaces, special rooms, and masonry. Modernized parliamentary workspaces thanks to integrated technological elements and accessibility elements. A new welcome center for Parliament, giving visitors a special entry, special security zone, and more dedicated public spaces. Improvements to infrastructure, notably when it comes to seismic resistance, modernizing construction systems, and connectivity throughout the parliamentary precinct. Improving the durability and natural light thanks to energy efficient lights and so on. And so we recommend that the design stage pass to the next stage, and there will be significant modifications.
The working group received detailed presentations on the conservation strategy for Center Block's most significant heritage spaces, including monumental and ceremonial Gothic spaces and special rooms as originally designed. The approach balances preservation with modernization while adhering to principles of accessibility by protecting architecturally significant spaces and heritage materials, integrating modern building systems, accessibility improvements, and security requirements, and finally, restoring symbolic and ceremonial elements while ensuring functionality for contemporary parliamentary use. This work ensures that the defining character of Center Block is preserved while enabling the building to serve Parliament for years to come. Now, the working group supported the proposed approach and recommends board endorsement of the integrated design for the Center Block heritage rooms. Now, on the Parliamentary Precinct Tunnels project, the working group reviewed an update on the parliamentary tunnels. This approach reduces construction risks and costs while allowing design and engineering work to advance in coordination with other major capital projects across the parliamentary precinct. The working group supported this approach and recommends that the board endorse the proposal. Sur le point sur la conception et le programme fonctionnel de l'île aux deux,
When it comes to design and functional program for Island 2, the working group studied this design. It proposes the creation of 94 parliamentary offices and other offices like meeting spaces to meet the needs of parliamentarians. It would also include security zones and operational zones to support parliamentary work, notably printing services, postal services, and a charging area. Parliamentarians and their staff would also have access to a cafeteria. The charging dock, which the Senate would also use, would have 2 bays. And this design meets parliamentary requirements and the requirements of a modern workplace. The working group approved the functional program and the conceptual plans and recommends that the board approve these elements.
Monument and the Indigenous Residential Schools National Monument. Now, the working group reviewed updates on 2 national monuments within the Parliamentary Precinct Landscape Strategy. During the discussion on the Queen Elizabeth II Equestrian Monument, the working group was reminded that the House of Commons adopted a motion that specifically directed that the equestrian statue of Queen Elizabeth II be erected on Parliament. The originator of the motion was MP Bill Tupper for the riding of the P in Carleton, passed in March 1988. The decision was adopted by an entire House and therefore should not be effectively overturned by a decision of the working group, the Board of Internal Economy, or by a minister through an order in Council. I want to personally thank Assistant Speaker John Nader, the MP for Perth-Wellington, for bringing these facts to the working group and for making an impassioned plea that this historical legacy be respected. Members also noted that Parliament Hill provided a more appropriate and accessible location for the monument than its current temporary location and placement near the main gate of Rideau Hall, where it is largely visible only from passing vehicles and not easily viewed by the public on foot. The working group reiterated that the monument was temporarily relocated to Rideau Hall in 2019 to allow excavation and construction associated with the Centre Block rehabilitation and the Parliament Welcome Centre, and recommends that it be returned to Parliament Hill as part of the completed landscape strategy. The working group also supports the participation of members and House administration representatives on an expert panel and technical committee related to the Indian Residential Schools National Monument. Donc, pour la conclusion et les prochaines étapes,
In terms of next steps, when the Centre Block project enters the construction phase, the design files will be published. At the same time, the working group will continue to track progress closely and examine key decisions. At the end of March, the working group will participate in a dedicated meeting about the arrangements of seats in the House in order to finish that design. In mid-April, there will be meetings for all members so that they can see physical models and give their feedback through their working group representative. Those comments will guide the working group's recommendations to the board. In order to get the approval of the board in June, members will also be invited to see those models. I'd be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Monsieur Scheer?
Mr. Chair?
Thanks very much. I've got a few points here we can raise in various orders, but I guess the first one would be on the Block 2 exterior design. It seems to me that when the Soviet Union collapsed, we must have got all their architects because we haven't been able to build a beautiful building in quite a long time. And I just think about what a shame it is that we've got the wonderful facade and exterior of Langevin Block. We have the building that is the old U.S. Embassy. We've got Victoria Building down the street. And of course, across the street from this, we've got the amazing historical and heritage buildings. And then we're going to build something that makes the Chateau Laurier parking garage structure look pretty good. Is it too late to go back to the drawing board on the exterior on this and maybe ask the design team to come up with something that tourists would appreciate having their picture taken in front of that would kind of blend in? Or are we destined to go another generation before we can build beautiful buildings again?
having been born in a Warsaw Pact country, I think I'm the wrong person to be asking, but I think you should ask PSPC.
Thank you very much for the question. I would start by saying that we do have a world-renowned architect, David Chipperfield, that's leading the design and is respecting a series of principles. But what I can say is the image that you're seeing in front of you has evolved quite dramatically. We just wanted to, and we're happy to bring that imagery back to see if it might be meeting more the needs and interests of the Board of Internal Economy. We just wanted to make sure that we were sharing the same conceptual designs that the design was at the time that the working group saw. But the facade is something that we have been working quite hard on and has evolved, and we would happily bring that back for consideration.
Can I ask a question? So basically you're saying this is just a placeholder. This box is just a placeholder.
There's 2 boxes.
Where's the other box?
It's worse.
Okay, these 2 boxes are placeholders. Is that what I should understand? They're not the final design.
They're not the final. So to answer your question, thank you very much. There are 2 towers being built on either side of 100
Right,
Wellington.
right.
So it is both those structures that you see in the render. This is an early render resulting from the schematic design process. We got specific feedback on the facade and needing to advance that. So we had engagements with the architect, and there have been advancements that have, to the best of my understanding, are more meeting the House and the Senate's requirements. But again, we would happily show those renderings to see if they are still hitting the mark. We're entering design development, so earlier the intervention, the better. Now's the time to influence those facades.
So just to confirm, this is we're not, we can isolate this and bring it back and then have some input on what it would eventually look like.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, because just because someone's world renowned doesn't mean that it's going to be a good product. There's lots of people that have painted and sculpted things that.
Well, it
get them a
depends
lot
on the
of
instructions they're given. They could be the best in the world, but if they're not given good instructions.
Yeah, well, that is also a fair point. So, okay, well, I'm glad to hear that we can maybe go through this, but bring this back if we can get a commitment to do that, and maybe insist on having something that looks nice. I'm happy to defer now if other people, I have more points, but I don't want to.
Okay, okay, Mr. Warkentin?
Yeah, just on that, I'm looking at a picture of the actual design that won the design competition, and I may have some concerns with regards to that, but that is actually a far more attractive building than what's being proposed now. This looks like any condo building that would be built in Toronto or downtown Ottawa. Far less attractive than anything else in the street, and certainly nothing that would leave a legacy, and certainly off-putting in comparison to the surrounding heritage buildings. And so I think that I hope you will hear from this body that we don't want that. Full stop. So let's revisit that. In terms of the center block front stairs, I see that there's a proposal to rip out the stone stairs that exist right now to replace it with something that would accommodate an elevator lift down the center of those front ceremonial stairs. I have significant reservation. I understand the desire for a dignified, accessible entrance, but what's being proposed, I think, is not that. I think sticking an elevator dead center to a beautiful heritage stair and having the possibility of look, if you're going to resurrect an elevator from time to time because somebody is a visiting dignitary, and have everyone watch them go up in this lift, I don't know that that's more dignified than going to an elevator that's maybe in a more discreet location, rather than what looks to be a ridiculous destruction of the current architecture. I think that that needs to be revisited. I think that is an unfortunate destruction of what exists there now. Is there any comment on that?
Thank you very much for the question. In terms of the ceremonial entry to Parliament, it's a very important feature of the building, and we are doing our very best to protect it. In fact, we believe we're leaving it pretty much status quo from its condition pre-closure, except that it will be modernized in terms of modern lighting, things
No,
like
but
that.
I'm looking at the
Yep, no,
renderings.
I'm coming there. So,
Yeah.
so what you will see day to day is essentially it'll look the same as it did before.
But you're removing the current stairs in order to do that because it's being hollowed out.
So I'm trying to answer
Yeah.
your question, if you'll just give me 30 seconds to get there. So what is being actually introduced there is something called an invisible lift. So day to day, you would not see anything. It would look like the traditional, and it would even be covered with stone like the original staircase had. When there was a need, it is a capability where the stairs essentially disappear and the lift comes back. But for the purposes of operating Parliament day to day, unless it is needed, the intent is to provide that capability, and it would look exactly like it did pre-closure. And we're actually testing that as a pilot because it's a new capability to Canada. It's used in Europe, but is not presently in our code. So we're actually doing a smaller version of it to test its viability at the East Block as we speak. That will inform whether or not we've got the technical capabilities to put it into play. I'll close by saying one of the guiding principles that has guided this whole design that was approved by the parliamentary administrations and what we're trying to achieve here in terms of accessibility is that people with disabilities and people that are able-bodied have a similar experience. We're trying to respect that, which is why we were pursuing that capability. But if there is a direction from Parliament that you don't want to proceed with that and you're willing to have your ceremonial visitors enter from another area, we can remove that from the program. It's up to Parliament.
The stairs would have to be removed in order for that to have a collapsible stair there.
Well, we would be removing them but putting them back in, just like we're removing
No,
heritage features and putting them back in
I'm seeing how
across the
it
building.
happens. It's removed so that the current stone would not be able to be used. I'm seeing head nod. Yeah, I think that would be one area that we would be very concerned about, and I think it would be for the very rare circumstances where this would be utilized. I'm wondering if there wouldn't be a possibility of a less expensive temporary alternative, such as a ramp that could be located for that purpose.
Can I just jump in? This was not a unanimous decision of the working group, and
can
there
see
was
why.
extensive debate around it. At multiple parts, in different parts of the design, there's this tension between returning the building exactly to where it was before and the modernization component of it, and the two sometimes conflict. And this is where the working group extensively debated this on that evening, could not come to an agreement on it. We did talk about other entrances to the building that would be equally universally accessible to a person needing to use it. But this is the recommendation that a majority of the working group brought forward. But there was the same discussions.
What's the cost of this element?
I'm going to have to come back to you. I don't have the exact cost for that particular element
An
with me
approximate?
today. It's new to Canada, so I don't know. I have to work with the company to understand, and we're actually in the process of updating our cost estimates, so I can happily provide that information back to the committee.
Okay, I
The
think
other
we should-
thing I would say is a ramp, just to answer that question so it's clear in your mind, a ramp with that rise will not be possible temporary. You'll need to look for an alternate strategy in.
How often has this type of how often have we had a visiting dignitary that would have required this type of an option?
Not often, sir. I mean, but what Jennifer said was the principle that was at the outset of the design of the building is how can we make it better for Canadians? But this is a ceremonial entrance, rarely used for other purpose than this. So, of course, there's alternative, as Monsieur Gamish said, they were debated extensively. But if the board's wishes is to accommodate in a separate entrance, that was also put on the table.
That'd be a good one. I just really, those stairs are architecturally significant to the building.
Vous voulez toujours être sur la liste? Est-ce que vous voulez que Monsieur
Do you still want to be on the list, or do you want Mr. McKinnon to go first? Yep. Okay, go ahead. Okay, I'll go. On that point, with respect, I think that accessibility, the building's being renovated for the long term, so I don't think that accessibility is a luxury. I do understand the need to keep the original materials, so I see how it's a difficult decision. But there's been a lot of talk about cost here. And no one's asked the question, if you come up with a new proposed facade, it would be interesting to know the cost of that. Earlier, there was a question about a new facade. Now, for some things, the cost doesn't matter. For other things, it seems the cost matters a lot. So I just wanted to raise that. Otherwise, overall, I think that the work done here is really exceptional. I really appreciate getting this whole file. I was not the whip when the work was started, so it's really nice to be able to look back at the work that's been done. I think you've done good work here, Mr. Kmich. Now, my question for you, which is not so much about the document we're looking at today, is just when do you think you will be able to give us the final plan for the new parking lot? Because in previous meetings, and, Mr. Workington raised a question about parking. We'd like to know the number of parking spots before we make any other decision that might limit the number of spaces available. So if you were able to provide us with that information, that might allow us to move forward with other decisions more easily.
Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Perron, c'est un excellent.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Perron, that's an excellent question. I think that we definitely listened to the issues raised by Messrs. Workington and Scheer in previous meetings. We're working very closely with our partners in order to get the details that we need for that. As you know, the LVTP is a long-term project with many different steps. We've certainly understood the concept that that parliamentarians don't want to lose parking spots, not only spots for parliamentarians, but parking spots in general. And so we're working very closely, so me, Jennifer, and our teams, to define a plan where there is a strategy at every step to make sure that we're always checking that there's no negative impact on parliamentarians or staff. I can say that we're working closely together, and we hope that we will be able to come back to you with that before the end of the parliamentary session. Before the summer adjournment. Yes, that's right. Thank you. So I'd like to come back to Block 2. I remember that Bruce Stanton was in the chair that you are now in, Mr. Kmich, and he had been part of a big jury that had chosen the design for Block 2. I think I missed the meeting where the changes were discussed, but personally, I saw an article, I believe, in the Globe and Mail saying that Canada has finally seen the light when it comes to architectural design contests, and it finally managed to select a really good project. And I agree with Mr. Scheer that that's not what we're looking at here. So I would ask officials to come back with something that looks more like what we had selected in the International Design Contest. There was great integration. There was an international firm involved. A lot of credibility within the architectural world. So I hope, Mr. Chair, that we will be able to come back to the integrity of that process.
Commentaire, question?
Comments or questions?
We have the same numbering in our books, but on page 12, I think it's 2 slides over, we've got the, has the location for the residential schools monument been, is that locked in, or is this are we being asked to endorse that as well?
The location right now has been determined to be in the West Block courtyard.
What's that, sorry?
In the West Block parking lot there. That's where for the residential.
And has that already been, is that a previous decision?
That was a decision that was taken.
Okay, and is this to scale, these?
It's a big monument, but I don't think it's to scale, sir. But it is a significant.
But it would be
impact on parking there.
Yeah. How many spots are going to be impacted by that?
Happy to take the question. So the location actually has been locked in. We are losing a net 33 spots potentially, but I will clarify Mr. Decare's comments. The design is not actually even started yet. So one of our colleague departments, this is not an initiative led by PSPC. We're supporting it as our minister has custody of the buildings and lands of Parliament Hill. But the location was previously decided upon. There'll be a net 33 loss of parking, which we have the ability to mitigate already. We have the mitigation parking in our inventory. The plan will be we have that parking at Place de Ville, and we will work with the House administration when construction of that monument is starting to move those parking spots and make sure that we're privileging parliamentarians parking on the Hill.
So when I hear words like "it was decided," I always think of the magical entity behind the "it." Who decided that?
So my understanding, we'd have to pull out the remit on this, but it was brought to this committee,
Okay.
and the Board of Internal Economy
did
did
agree to-
approve the location.
Okay, and you say the design hasn't started, but you already know you're going to lose 33, so the
No.
size must be known.
No. We don't know. We're just we plan for the worst, hope for the best. That those always result in the best laid plans. So we've done some analysis to make sure that we can mitigate some of the parking around the monument site. There is the site, we've limited the monument design, but they're still in the process of actually standing up their steering committees and launching the design process. I understand they have engaged the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada to help them with a design competitive process for that, which we will follow closely and provide technical support to, but we're far away from putting shovels in ground, and we'll be back here well before that to brief you on the design and give you the further details on the impacts associated with it.
Okay, and just it doesn't seem like there's much more discussion. So just are we all in agreement on the exterior of Block 2 coming back with the opportunity for some direction and input? Okay.
Okay, any more questions? Yes, Ms. Kayabaga.
East Tower entrance. So you're proposing, I think there's 2 images. I'm no longer part of the LTVP, so I don't really know what the discussion was. I'm okay with this because I think it's accessible and it plans for people. If you look at the median age in politics, there's a lot of people who are aging, and anyone could need it. We could potentially have, even a governor who has a disability in the future. Like, I think this to me is not a big problem. But there's 2 images that you've proposed here now. So which one are you wanting us to make a decision on?
Just to answer your question, Ms. Quebec, it's the same stairs. One is collapsed and one is in its.
So what else are you proposing outside of this?
This was the proposal that was endorsed by the working group. If the board decides to change the direction.
What would you do if there was a governor general who was disabled? Like, would they have to go in the back? Like, what's the proposal that you're making other than these?
We would have to choose another entrance to be able to accommodate if those ceremonials.
But you're offering an option where they could come through this entrance. I'm totally fine with this proposal, the proposal where there is an accessibility component to it, because it's planning for anyone who may have a disability. Making a decision on whether we can think of other leaders who may have or may not have a disability when we know that a lot of people are aging and could potentially have a disability is not the right decision, in my opinion. I think the right decision should be, if we can accommodate accessibility, we should. So that's my thought on that.
Did I understand that there was a desire to have the LTPV come back with on this particular? There wasn't an agreement on this. So yes.
Yeah, I think the recommendation should be there's been a commitment that they're trying this out in a different building. At that time, we'll better know the cost and the actual, if it worked or not, and if it would impact the actual architecture of the existing stairs. And if that's what they're committing, then why don't we just hear back from them once they get the determination as to if or not that worked.
Thank you for the question. And again, we are happy to come back to inform you on the pilot and on the costing. But just to be clear on what's in your package from the image that you showed me, Madame Kayabega, those are the same stairs. One shows the stairs as they would look day to day. If you see that middle part out, that's where the lift is, and that's trying to demonstrate the lift in operation. If there was a need for it. So day to day, the stairs would go straight across, and then when you needed it, that centerpiece would drop and come up.
And so just to understand, because I think there was a question around the dignity of the person who may have to use it, this would be set up before the person, like way before they arrive. They wouldn't have to see what it looked like before you dropped it down, correct?
I would leave the procedural to ceremonial, but presumably that would be a very good idea. That would be a very good idea, so you don't have to see it in action.
Correct. Okay, I'm fine with it.
We're going to get some more input on that particular aspect. So other than that, we endorse the center block and Parliament Welcome Center design. We endorse the center block approach for the integrated design of the heritage rooms. Correct. Endorse the proposal for the Parliamentary Campus Tunnels project to refocus the underground tunnel design on pedestrian movement.
I was a little bit surprised to find out. I remember the day in which tunnels were necessary for material management. Yes. And then I recall that there was a push to include pedestrian to be added to the material management tunnels. And now I understand that now we're not even utilizing these tunnels for material management. It's simply for pedestrian. Is that correct?
I think it's a cost issue, is it not? It's a question of how wide the tunnel would be. It's very more. I think I got a figure somewhere that it's $150 million more to make the tunnel wide enough for material. Is that correct? Yes.
So quite a few months ago, PSPC came to see us and wanted to look at opportunities for cost savings. Okay, and we looked at everything within the portfolio that was available, and one of them, what the administration was asked to support, is shifting from material handling and pedestrian to a pedestrian only, from 6 meters to 3 meters. Tunnels are important component for Parliament, and seen around the world also, an important contributor also to security. So. The administration was inclined to try to help find savings, and it was in the order of a significant order of millions of dollars in savings. And we feel that the north to south scenario can be managed from a material handling. East and west is still very efficient with the new material handling facility that will be built in the coming years.
Okay, so that was my question. I mean, there must have been a reason as to why it was initially planned for material management. I don't know what all gets moved on a regular basis. It's probably there's probably a reason for that.
So the original intent was to have a central material handling facility that would handle all material handling for the campus, north and south, and east and west. By looking at some of the designs where you saw loading docks in Block 2 now, that facilitates the need or removes the need for having wider tunnels, because we've kept some shipping and loading capabilities within those new buildings.
along the same vein, and I don't have strong views necessarily, but was there ever an evaluation done on what cost could be saved with the tunnels? I'm assuming that with tunnels you would require fewer short trips with trucks from loading and unloading facilities. You kind of partially answered it with what you just said about Block 2, but was that ever evaluated to potentially offset the cost of the tunnels? Would there ever have been savings realized with the reduction in the need for things like trucks?
Yeah, so there was multiple options considered working with the Public Works, and one of them was really around, utilizing the facilities such as Block 2 as a tunnel entryway instead of actually building a tunnel in front of the building. So that's one of the cost saving that contributed significantly. Other connection points also were reduced to ensure that we were delivering some cost savings in the tunnel design itself. And then the width of the tunnel and the fact that we are streamlining material movement now in a east-west more concentrated and not necessarily concentrating on that north-south really contributed to those savings. And this is hundreds of millions of dollars of savings.
To Block 2 exterior design, it's agreed that those are placeholders, and we're going to see something as it evolves. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Just for greater certainty, we would basically be endorsing the conceptual floor plan layouts, the functional program, but not the exterior design. On that, we're not endorsing today. Okay.
That's right. Pardon?
We're agreeing with Mr. Sherk.
Okay, good. That's correct. And then the last point is the monuments, and where are we on the monuments? Pardon? Queen and the Indian Residential School National Monument.
Well, residential schools, in my mind, that decision's made.
Yeah, no, I understand, but I mean, it talks about how an expert panel and all of that. Are we agreeing to have members of the Senate and members of the Parliament to be on an expert panel? Or
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. And in terms of the Queen, as Mr. Comich set out, Mr. Nader was extremely convincing, and we're happy to endorse his very firm view.
Okay, so the Queen's coming back. Okay.
That's it.
So that's it? Okay. So that we have 5 minutes left. Do we want 3 minutes? Okay. Go on.
Thank you.